Futurama comic, issue 77. Bender acts scared and tells someone to take his friend and his money, and it turns out that rather than them being mugged, they're being offered free samples by guys dressed like candy. So he asks someone if they'd like a bite of him. Based on what he was wearing, it should have been obvious he was just a friendly mascot. Fry tells Bender that New York's really changed. You used to have to always be on the lookout for criminals, but now it's all touristy. Why is he complaining? Bender complains because his favorite sleazy bar got turned into a coffee bar. Leela lampshades Fry missing the days before things were good, as Leela's wearing a white getup that she never wears. Fry says that things were more fun when they were dangerous. He's just saying this because Bender's a bad influence on him. Farnsworth says that when he was a boy, dinosaurs roamed the streets. And we see him point to a picture of him as a kid with a newspaper headline that a mad scientist child cloned the dinosaurs. And they couldn't be perfect clones, because the dinosaurs were only able to survive because there was so much oxygen back then, and they had feathers. Leela's right that this is just how people feel when they get older. They really do get attached to how things are. Fry says an old guy wouldn't drink an extra caffeinated Slurm. Amy's unnecessarily rude to him and says that some of them are trying to work. I've read over 70 issues of this comic, and so far the only times she's really stood out as actually likable are when she's being a good girlfriend to Kenneth. Otherwise, I don't see a point to her character. Speaking of work, I don't even remember her doing any work. Then Fry says he's had too much caffeine. This is just lazy because he already had too much caffeine in one of the episodes. Bender tells him not to break a hip. Fry goes for a walk and wonders where everyone is in the city that never sleeps. He sees someone next to a cigar store. How's there a store entirely dedicated to cigars in the future? It turns out the guy can use magic to change the store to a teddy bear shop. Good. So this is proof that witches and warlocks do exist in the Futurama series. And the existence of magic makes a lot of the weirder plot points make sense. And the guy gets scared because Fry wasn't asleep like the rest. The guys all of the streetlights turn on when Fry's standing there, and none of Fry's friends believe him about this, and Leela says it was all just a dream. And she's seen plenty of strange things. It's frustrating to see his friends not believe him when we know it really happened. One of the office rules is to throw out all expired yogurt before it becomes sentient. How would it become sentient? Farnsworth says he'll hook up Fry to a lie detector, and then he tells him to stay in here and stop bothering everyone while they're trying to work. And nobody even looked like they were trying to work. Fry tells Bender to stay awake with them, and Bender refuses because he's a bad friend and downloaded a saucy dream. Why couldn't they just cut the scenes where his friends don't believe him out of the story entirely? They clearly had nothing, just get you in a bad mood. Fry decides to drink a can of Slurm, extra drowsy, and get to sleep. Right afterwards, he sees the Warlock. Is he only appearing because he keeps drinking Slurm? That'd be a wacky twist. The Warlock says that someone had to clean the apartment, and he turned Bender into a cute robot that just wants to help. And this scares Fry because he's not used to it. But for the most part, while the Warlock looks creepy, everything he's been doing is good so far. Bender gives Fry a hug, and Zoidberg got brainwashed into thinking that Bender was always so helpful. Well, he has been helpful. And Leela says he's helped the crew save the world a lot. Why would the Warlock brainwash everyone except Fry into thinking things were always the way he made them to be? Bender offers everyone some of his famous bendy burgers, and his friends love them. Fry's confused because Bender's a terrible cook, and Hermes and Zoidberg look completely unlikable by planning to have Fry committed. This makes the Warlock look unlikable. Did he even try to have Fry brainwashed too? He would've. Zoidberg somehow made some papers to say that Fry's legally dead by accident. And somehow this isn't even the first time he did that. Why didn't the Warlock who wants to make everything better make Zoidberg better too? Why would Hermes still suck? Hermes takes this as an excuse to fire Fry for being annoying with what he's saying. How would there be no wrongful termination laws in the future? Fry walks away instead of thinking to sue him for wrongful termination, because what he's saying around the office has nothing to do with how competent he is at delivery. Bender says it'll help Fry figure out what's going on. Bender gets told to help him keep an eye out and scares him by taking it literally. Why would he be made to be like this when he was only altered to be made better? Instead, he's more evil here, in practice, and when someone comes in, Bender still wants to scare him. Thankfully, a Deus Ex Machina happens because Bender ends up getting beaten up by Leela because she's going to believe him. So what took so long? Because she happens to have bad breath, Fry says he'll get her caffeinated first instead of kissing her. Since when does she have bad breath? Bender's staying awake because Slurm makes a soda for robots packed with caffeinated nanites. Leela sees something across the street as I'm still wondering how Fry was the only person awake at night to witness the Warlock when plenty of people walk around in the city at night. Just not as many people. So the Warlock was really recent in what he was doing. How? Wouldn't Warlocks have existed for millennia? Because humans have? Bender smashes the window by jumping into it while holding his friends, because Fry just said he wanted to get over there fast. Why would Bender be made to be like this by a well-intentioned Warlock? How did he not anticipate that being literal-minded could cause trouble? He grabs onto a flagpole and spins around to slow down their fall, using up the momentum of the fall. And they all fall in the dumpster, where Zoidberg happens to be. They all see the Warlock turn the horse betting parlor into a pony petting zoo. Good. Fry's at least capable of appreciating one thing he did, saying, "Aww." And while it's refreshing that he had this reaction, I wish Leela said this too. The Warlock heard Fry and tells him he can't stop him, but he has no reason to be afraid of Fry. The Warlock brainwashes Bender into knocking out all three of them. They wake up. Wait, why doesn't he brainwash all three of them into agreeing with what he's doing? Why would he resort to violence? They wake up in the hidden headquarters at Madison Square Garden. I know it's Cube Garden, but I never take it seriously when they have the wrong name just to avoid copyright. They have front row seats to the developers, who are improving the city and put everyone in the city to sleep while they do it. And the reason they're still awake is because of the Slurm. There's so many people in the city. These three would be far from the only people in the city who'd be drinking that drink. Anyways, Fry gets given warm milk and calls him a monster for it. Really drives home the fact that the main characters are all anti-heroes. The only reason they qualify as heroes is because a lot of the main characters have saved the world. These guys travel around the universe making things better, more family friendly. I like how their smiles are genuine. Why does he have to smirk in the next panel when he's got good intentions? We see the crazy cat lady get turned into a normal person tending to her garden. The knife robot gets made to act like a dog, and the annoying lazy employee says he can't wait to run around in the park. These guys aren't very good villains if I'm outright rooting for them. It just makes the story frustrating. Sure, I want Bender back to normal, but that's the only problem. And that's only because I'm used to Bender being the old way and he's useful to his friends, actually saving them because he's a kleptomaniac. This story really drives a point home that Futurama's a crapsack world, and that's not as good of a thing as it thinks it is. Because I don't see what's wrong with it fixing these problems. Fry doesn't tell them that Bendy tried to take his eye out and nearly got him and Leela killed, somehow. He also doesn't tell them that Bender's constant kleptomania resulted in him having objects in his chest that his friends needed. And he doesn't tell them that his tendency to get in trouble caused him to go to the right places at the right times to overhear bad guys talking about their plans. Basically, he could easily make a case for why Bender being the way he is worth it and necessary because it keeps his friends alive. And who knows when they're gonna save the world again. Instead, Fry just says, "What right do I have to do this?" One of the developers says that they are infinitely powerful. Yeah, and if you have power, why not use it to help people? Fry's just using an emotion-based argument. I wish the developers were just called Warlocks instead. I'm still not being told how they're able to do this stuff. So they have to be warlocks. They want to help Fry's entire world. Fry says it's the grit, grime, and gross stuff that everything good about the city grows out of. Huh? He's doing a terrible job arguing with them. I hope the writer didn't want me to agree with Fry. Isn't Leela supposed to be smart? This is the point where she's supposed to be doing the arguing. The developers plan on changing things so that Leela's a juggler in Times Square. At least that's safer than her old job. And Fry's gonna be made to sell healthy hot dogs, which is also better for his health. But again, they're being short-sighted because they don't realize that these guys have saved the world by having the jobs they do. So the world needs them to be in those jobs, even if in the short term it looks like it's making things better by giving them different jobs. But no, don't have any of the main characters tell them that. Just have them be strawmen. Bender says he can't help Leela because when he was remade, they made him unable to hurt them, only help. Fry asks him if he sees anything they could use help with. Bendy says one of their outfits is a little tight. The guy admits that he gained weight and his friends fixed that. Why didn't they notice that and fix that earlier? Bendy says that one's eyebrows are too bushy, and that one has a funny voice, and that one slouches. They would have known most of that already and learned to accept it if they haven't made the changes by now. Why are they just following his orders blindly, instead of getting offended? Bendy keeps criticizing their appearances. And 10 minutes later, the developers can't remember who they are anymore. That sure is convenient. Fry tells them they're a breakdancing group and gets thanked for it, and Bender's magically back to normal because Deus Ex Machina, even though there's no reason for that. There's also no reason everything else would go back to normal, because the Warlocks would have had to imagine that to make it happen. And they don't remember anything. So they all see some depressing footage on the screen, and the story ends with the crew getting mugged. Futurama comic, issue 78. Bender looks like a hobo and hasn't drank in a few days. And it's surprisingly funny that he said, "Brother, can you spare some change that I can melt down and make a weapon to rob you with?" Why would he admit that? Hermes tells him the office is no place for his robo-hoboing and tells him to get rid of that Kindle bindle and get back to work. Bender says he just wants a raise and is trying to make him feel sorry for him. But Hermes doesn't have a sense of pity, which he literally says, but somehow he says it happened because his useless appendix was taken out. Zoidberg says he didn't know what it looked like, so he just kept taking out parts to be safe, when it's immediately obvious that being safe would be looking up what it looks like on Google by looking up the human body in just a few seconds. And I have to assume Hermes was living off a replacement spleen, and that's why he's still alive. Bender fortunately lampshades the stupid decision to let Zoidberg operate on him, and Hermes says he's all the company healthcare plan could afford. Again, Farnsworth could sell so many of his inventions to primitive planet people, so clearly he could afford anything he wants. Bender should know he's wasting time by asking for more money, and that he's not helping his case by saying he wants to waste it on luxuries. Fry apologizes for being late, and he shows up superglued to his bed. Leela's apparently used to this because all she does to react to this is shush him and say they're trying to watch TV. The news gets interrupted because the richest being in the universe, Big Bucks, has something to say. His ancestor invented money 1 billion years ago, and then invented a bank the next day and opened a savings account. I'm pretty sure money would have always been around. He's got no time to start a family, so he's gonna buy one. If he's got no time to start a family, he's got no time to take care of it. He tells people on an ad that if they want to be his adopted heir, they can come to the orphanage, and the most adorable child will become rich. How can he quantifiably measure adorableness? So many children would show up. He'd have to not only choose the most cute one, but also one that's the best at other things, like being nice. Someone thanks Leela for helping to organize the orphan auditions, which of course Leela loved doing as a former orphan. The building was infested with tall talking termites who bossed the orphans around, and somehow nobody's kicking them off the property. Then there's a ridiculous plot point where Bender shows up in a disguise that makes it obvious he's a robot. And an adult. It'd be pretty annoying if Bender got to be his heir, and I'm gonna assume it's only because he's a main character. In a failed attempt at a joke, after Bender sings, he gets picked for the role right away because of his red hair. He doesn't even consider seeing the other children. What does the robot beside him talk as if Bender's one of the children? Bender even says he loves his money, so it should be obvious to him that he's bad news. And Leela says that hair looks familiar. It turns out, after it's revealed that somehow Zoidberg operates without anesthesia, Bender stole Fry's hair. So why am I supposed to find his friendship with Fry touching? I wouldn't want to spend any time with him. He says he looks like a freak in front of Farnsworth and Zoidberg, so to add insult to injury, Hermes forced him to go to sensitivity classes before he can go back to work. Even though he said he was sorry. He was only talking about himself, and that was obvious. Bender gets taken to another planet for his new forever home. Won't he miss Fry? He's told his butler will show him around while he gets ready for the surprise. The surprise, that sounds like an ominous plot twist. The mansion's made of super gold, and the lake's filled with $1,000,000 bills, so this guy's a scumbag for not donating them. No one would waste money like this. The mountains are solid diamond and chipped in instead of being an interesting feature of an alien planet. Bender gets told to wipe his tears with a very valuable copy of Superman's first issue. That's also forced. He's told he's gonna go to his room, and when Bender says that he's finally getting what's coming to him, it immediately makes it obvious that there'd be a sad twist. He says this leads out into a jungle. So it's actually good that he hired him as his new heir instead of one of the orphans, because he deserves it. Big Bucks unrealistically adopts orphans to hunt for sport, instead of getting a robot. And it's explained that hunting your kids is legal in this part of the galaxy. That's forced, but it at least explains why he's getting away with it. It's weird that I've seen this kind of thing before in a Sonic comic, but at least there the hunter hunted animal people. So I could see why that was written, because it's taking advantage of the fact that the Mobians look like animals. Here I just have to assume that Big Bucks doesn't see these orphans as people because they're not the same species as him. And while serial killers do exist, so this isn't totally unbelievable, what are the chances that his butler would be perfectly fine with this? Well, he does look like a robot, so I guess he was programmed to. But again, I shouldn't have to assume that. But I like that it's explained that the reason he likes those with red hair the most is that they're much easier to see in the green jungle. Bender gets a 5-minute head start. And then we see that Charlie Brown grew up to be the leader of Baldies Against Hate. John Luke complains because everyone thinks the last person who had his job was better because he had hair. A bald woman complains that everyone she meets thinks that she can read their thoughts. I guess because of Professor Xavier? And she can. Why would they say that to a woman? Then Fry's forced by the writer to say a bunch of things that gets them all to run after him and try to legally assault him. And he says that for an anti-hate group, they're not peaceful. Yeah, they come off as the hate group. They're just complaining about people who aren't bald. Fry was right when he suggested wearing cowboy hats, because if they're so sick of being treated a tiny bit worse for being bald, a hat would solve that problem. Instead, they just take offense to the truth, like a bunch of 6-year-olds. Big Bucks approaches Bender when Bender is hiding up a tree and aims a ray gun at him. Bender throws his wig on the butler, and he adds the foresight to put glue on it. Predictably, Big Bucks fires a laser at the butler, and somehow he thinks he'd be allowed to do that. When if he was like a son to him, he wouldn't want to do this. If Bender had to stay close to someone he hated or get shocked in the story, that would have been more tense and had more things going on. Leela reassures Fry, showing pity for him, and reveals that she cut off her own hair to make it into a wig for him. Why is Fry bald for so long instead of immediately getting a hair transplant like in an earlier issue? Then Leela gets told she looks like Mr. Clean's wife and gets furious with him and runs after him, demanding her hair back. When the later seasons of the series established that Leela finally realized that he's just innocently insensitive and learned to not be so hard on him. When he said that it's great to have the old weird-looking Leela back, she thought it was sweet. He was clearly smiling when he said this to her. but she managed to take offense to it anyways, when him saying that implied that Mr. Clean would find her attractive enough to want to marry her. Fry lampshades bald folks being portrayed as too touchy in the story, well, I'm wondering why he suddenly has a compressed vice of being insensitive to bald people. Because it's not funny. I'm just feeling bad for him and frustrated. Bender gets distracted by a really obviously too good to be true trap. A bucket of money with a sign saying free money. So he gets to stop, creating fire beneath his feet like he's Sonic. He gets caught by a rope and threatened. Conveniently, his hunter wastes time asking if he has any last words, when there's no reason he couldn't just take the words he just said to him as those last words. Thank goodness the Planet Express ship crashed into him out of complete nowhere. Fry says Bender needs to hide him. Oh great. I thought the ship crashed on big bucks, but instead it just made a rough landing, and Fry miraculously didn't get injured or killed from it. Then just have him land it properly with the autopilot. He's better piloting than that. He got a license. The awful character says nothing can kill him, somehow. Except a weapon that only he owns. Why would he tell them his weakness? Why would he have the weapon at all? And I guess it won't be explained that magic is the reason he's invincible like that, when that has to be it. Conveniently, there's a Deus Ex Machina where Fry isn't in danger because he's bald, so he's told to stay at his mansion in a life of luxury. But that ends up being completely pointless because Fry stupidly refuses. And Big Bucks doesn't really care about Fry if he's considering shooting him anyways. Thankfully he gets shot with a super anti-matter gun by his butler. The Chekhov's gunman, he shouldn't have gotten mad at him. Bender's told that as the Master's heir, he inherits his fortune, everything on this world. The next day, Bender says he's spent all of his money, because he's got fancy tastes. He says all he's got left is the tool shed, and he wants to take it home with a ship. The butler doesn't want freedom because being a butler is all he knows. Bender makes him his own butler. Leela tells the termites to give the kids back their home, and thank goodness the jerks get squished by the tool shed. About time, because there's nothing likable about them at all. Fry apologizes and says that the rope he tied the tool shed to the ship with broke. He apologizes to Leela, and she says she's okay with being bald for a while. It makes sense because she's been a Cyclops her whole life. So at that point, being a bald woman too isn't as weird. At least it puts extra emphasis on her eyelashes. But she could get a wig at any time. Bender says the orphanage can have the tool shed, because the police are going to want to ask about the accident. And realistically, he's on triple parole. The orphan thanks Fry and asks them to play table tennis with them so they could be ping pong balls. The one who said this forced joke is Bald himself. The story ends with them all running after the orphans for revenge because of one stupid joke. Well, this story sucked. The so-called villains are clearly just improving the city with their magic. Imagine if this was happening in real life. This is what it'd be like if the witches of Sabrina didn't believe in non-interference, and weren't fanatical about witches doing evil. And I don't really see a problem, other than the fact that Bender being the way he is comes in handy for his friends in their dangerous lives. And someone should have told the developers that to bring him back to normal. Instead, Fry doesn't do a very good job arguing with them, and they all conveniently agree to make a bunch of changes to each other just because Bender suggested those changes, when they would have seen those flaws in each other a lot earlier than this. They definitely wouldn't change themselves so that they wouldn't even remember who they are anymore. And that would turn things back to normal. I hate the part of the story where nobody believes Fry but the Warlock. And the ending is depressing because all I'm really seeing is genuinely well-intentioned people here. The heroes should have said that the world might be destroyed at some point if they aren't in their jobs as delivery people, because they've saved the world so many times because of those jobs. And Bender's been very helpful with that because he's evil. The main characters should have been saying that, and that would make it clear that these guys are in the wrong, and I shouldn't be rooting for them. There isn't a predictable twist where one of them is actually evil. They're just short-sighted and ignorant. At least I can appreciate how creative that was. I guess they don't have the right to do this, but I can understand because they're just trying to help. So it's forced that the way they made Bender different made him actually dangerous to Fry and Leela. This story was annoying. Bender's plot was about him getting picked to be the heir of a rich guy instead of actual orphans who aren't in a bad disguise. But that's fortunately explained because he likes red hair as it stands out against the jungle better when he's hunting. But while it would make a tense plot that he's finding his way around the place trying to avoid a hunter, barely anything is done with the idea because most of the comic space is wasted on this frustrating and unfunny subplot where Fry keeps on offending bald people after Bender shaves his head for a wig, when he could have easily just stolen a wig and not betrayed his best friend. Every other story I've read where sentient characters got hunted did this plot better because those stories had stuff happen when they're running away from the hunter. They ran through various different settings. Knuckles had to work together with his old bully and went from the forest to Hydrocity. Tails avoided a sword that got stuck in some wood. Here, Bender just goes up a tree somehow and instantly gets spotted. The hunter conveniently goes after his own butler because his wig fell on his head, and then immediately finds Bender again with neither of them doing anything memorable. Fry's ship really should have simply landed on him, because when it was asked how his butler survived to kill him, he didn't get to explain, because the writer is too lazy to come up with an explanation. I assume he missed all of his shots, even though he's so close to him. The plot with Bender came off as overdone and watered down. And Fry's plot was blatant padding.